The sun had just risen over the quiet village of Kandula, casting a golden glow over the small mud huts and bustling market stalls. Birds chirped in harmony, and children ran barefoot along the dusty paths, their laughter echoing through the trees. Among the villagers, one name was spoken with admiration: Nyoma. She was the pride of Kandula. Her warm smile could light up the darkest corner, and her gentle nature made her beloved by both young and old. But Nyoma was not just known for her beauty. She had dreams, big dreams. She wanted to become a herbal healer, open her own wellness hut, and help the sick and poor with nature's medicine. She spent most of her days collecting herbs, learning from the village elder women, and sketching plans for her future healing center. But fate, as it often does, had something unexpected in store. One morning, as villagers gathered at the central square for what was rumored to be a big announcement, curiosity filled the air. People whispered among themselves, wondering what the news could be. Suddenly, a tall, well-dressed man stepped forward. It was Jabari, the son of Boko, the richest merchant in the region. He had been away in the big city for years, chasing money and power. Now, he returned with silk clothes, gold rings, and a pride that filled the air before he even spoke. With a smug smile and his head held high, Jabari walked up to the village elders. He looked around the crowd and then fixed his eyes on Nyoma, who stood quietly near the back with her basket of herbs. Without hesitation, he spoke loudly. "I have returned not just for business, but for love. I want Nyoma as my wife." Gasps spread through the crowd. Some looked at each other in shock, others in confusion. It wasn't love that they saw, it was control. Jabari's voice carried arrogance, not affection. He didn't speak of Nyoma's heart, her dreams, or her spirit. He spoke like a man making a business deal. All eyes turned to Nyoma. Her heart pounded. She was caught off guard, but she did not shake. She stepped forward slowly, looked Jabari in the eye, and with a calm but firm voice she said, "I do not love you, Jabari. I cannot marry you." There was silence, complete silence. Even the birds stopped singing. The proud smile on Jabari's face disappeared. His eyes narrowed. His pride, bigger than the mountains, had been crushed in front of everyone. No woman had ever dared to say no to him, especially not in public, especially not someone he thought he could easily claim. People began murmuring. Some respected Nyoma's courage. Others feared what Jabari might do next. But Nyoma stood strong, unaware that her simple, honest answer had just lit a dangerous fire in Jabari's heart. He clenched his fists behind his back, forcing a bitter smile as he nodded slowly. But inside, something dark was growing. His ego had been bruised, and Jabari was not a man who forgot insults. That day, he didn't just walk away rejected. He walked away angry, humiliated, and quietly vowing to make Nyoma regret every word she said. What Nyoma didn't know was that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a storm that would turn her peaceful world upside down. Jabari could not sleep that night. His mind burned with rage and humiliation. He kept hearing Nyoma's voice in his head, that calm but powerful rejection. "I do not love you, Jabari." Those words echoed like thunder in his ears. He wasn't used to hearing no, especially not from a village girl. His pride had been wounded in front of everyone, and his heart twisted with bitterness. He didn't care about love anymore. He wanted revenge. He wanted Nyoma to suffer for embarrassing him. And so, Jabari's dark plan began. The next morning, he went straight to the elders' council. With gold coins in his pocket and a charming smile on his face, he whispered lies into their ears. He told them Nyoma was arrogant, that she disrespected traditions, that she was cursed. He offered them generous gifts, money, goods, even promises of city connections. Slowly, the elders began to turn against Nyoma. Meetings that once welcomed her now excluded her. Her voice, once respected, was now ignored. But Jabari didn't stop there. He paid gossiping women to spread terrible rumors. Stories that Nyoma's herbs made people ill, that her mother had practiced dark magic, that her refusal had invited bad luck upon the village. These lies spread like wildfire. Neighbors who used to smile at her began looking at her with fear. Children were warned to stay away. Farmers who once bought her herbs refused to visit her hut. Her small wellness business crumbled day by day. Even her friends, girls she had grown up with, laughed with, shared secrets with, began distancing themselves. They were scared of Jabari's influence. They didn't want to be next. And worst of all, Nyoma's own father began to change. Once proud of her independence, He now grew anxious. He saw the way people treated her, heard the whispers. One evening, he sat down with her, eyes heavy with fear. "Nyoma," he said quietly, "maybe you should reconsider Jabari's offer. He's powerful now. We can't survive like this." Nyoma looked at her father, her heart breaking. Even he, the man who had raised her to be strong and free, was folding under pressure. But she shook her head gently. "I cannot marry someone I don't love, Papa. I will find another way." Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Jabari's wrath grew heavier. One evening, as she returned home after a long walk in the forest, collecting herbs in secret, she saw Jabari walking past her hut. He paused, looked at her with a twisted smile, and whispered, "You rejected me. Now you'll see what life without me feels like." Nyoma's hands trembled. She said nothing. She closed the door behind her and sank to the ground. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she made no sound. She wept in silence, her heart full of pain, confusion, and helplessness. How could one man's bruised ego destroy everything she had worked for? But what she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Jabari's revenge was not done. His darkness was only starting to spread, and soon, Nyoma's world would face trials she never imagined. Nyoma woke up to the scent of burning leaves and something bitter in the air. As she stepped outside her hut, her heart dropped. Her small herb garden, the very heart of her dream, had been destroyed. Plants she had nurtured with love were crushed, pulled out from their roots, and scattered like trash. Some had been set on fire. The sweet scent of healing leaves was replaced by smoke and ashes. She fell to her knees, staring at the ruins of the one place that gave her hope. She didn't need to ask who had done it. She already knew. Everywhere she turned, people avoided her. Customers who once greeted her with smiles now crossed the street to avoid her eyes. Mothers who used to bring their sick children to her whispered behind her back. Market vendors turned cold. Rumors flew faster than wind. People said her herbs were cursed, that her healing powers were from dark spirits, that misfortune followed anyone who visited her hut. All lies, planted by Jabari's greed and pride, but they were spreading like wildfire. Nyoma tried to fight back. She walked to the elders, pleading her innocence. But they looked at her with empty eyes, their minds already filled with Jabari's gold and stories. She tried to visit her old customers, offering free herbs, hoping to rebuild trust. But doors were slammed in her face. Her once vibrant life had turned into a lonely shadow. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and darkness settled over Kandula, Shoni, Nyoma's last true friend, came rushing to her hut. She looked nervous, her eyes darting in every direction. "Nyoma," she whispered, gripping her hand tightly, "you need to be careful. Jabari is not just angry, he's dangerous. I heard him speaking to some men. He wants to ruin you completely. He says if he can't have you, then no one else ever will." Nyoma's chest tightened. She had known Jabari was cruel, but this was something darker, something deeper than revenge. It was obsession. It was destruction. Still, she tried to stay strong. She kept collecting herbs in secret, drying leaves at night, praying that somehow the village would open their eyes. But her strength was wearing thin. Her heart was heavy. And then, the final blow came. Her father came home one afternoon, his clothes dusty, his face pale. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat down quietly. Nyoma asked him what had happened, and he finally spoke, voice shaking. "I had no choice," he said. "The debt collectors came. Jabari pressured the council. They forced me to sell our farmland." Nyoma froze. Their farmland, the only inheritance from her late mother, the land where she had planned to build her healing center, was gone, sold under pressure, taken by the same man who was destroying their lives. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry out. She simply stood there, silent and still, feeling her dreams crumble around her like dry leaves in the wind. Everything she had hoped for, everything she had worked for, had been crushed beneath Jabari's rage. And yet, something inside her still refused to break. But the truth was clear now. Jabari wasn't just trying to punish her. He wanted to erase her, piece by piece. And the village, once filled with love and laughter, had turned its back on her completely. The sky was heavy that day, covered in dark clouds as if the heavens knew what was about to happen. Nyoma sat quietly by her hut, trying to grind a few remaining herbs, even though her heart was no longer in it. Suddenly, she heard the sound of marching feet, loud, firm, threatening. When she stepped outside, her heart sank. Jabari was approaching, surrounded by guards and village elders. His face wore a cruel smile, one that spoke of power, not love. Behind him, One of the elders held a rolled-up parchment. Jabari snatched it and waved it in the air. "This is a legal contract," he announced loudly. "Signed by your father. It states that you will marry me to repay the debt your family owes." Nyoma's eyes widened in shock. "What? That's a lie. My father would never agree to this." But her father, standing silently behind the crowd, avoided her gaze. He looked broken, ashamed. Jabari had found a way to trap them both, through desperation, fear, and manipulation. Nyoma ran to her father, begging him to speak the truth, but he only whispered, "I had no choice, my daughter." He threatened everything. Nyoma's voice cracked as she screamed, "I will not marry a man I don't love." But no one listened. Before she could even gather her thoughts, the guards grabbed her arms. She fought, cried, and pleaded, but they dragged her like a criminal through the village. People watched, some in silence, others whispering, none brave enough to speak out. The girl who once brought healing to the village was now being taken like a prisoner to a life she never chose. When they reached Jabari's compound, a grand mansion with tall gates and thick walls, Nyoma knew this was not a home, it was a prison. That night, against her will, the marriage was sealed. No celebration, no joy, just silence and sorrow. Her body sat in the bridal room, but her soul was somewhere far away. Days passed, and the nightmare deepened. Nyoma was not allowed to step outside without permission. Guards followed her every move. The windows were barred, the doors locked. Jabari strutted around the house like a king, but Nyoma never once looked at him. Her eyes were hollow, empty of light. Her voice, once full of laughter and wisdom, had become silent. She stopped singing. She stopped smiling. Even the birds that once perched near her window stopped coming. It was as if nature itself mourned her captivity. The girl who had once danced with the wind and talked to the trees now lived behind stone walls and iron gates. She was given fine clothes, jewelry, and food, but they all felt like shackles. A golden cage was still a cage. Sometimes late at night, she sat by the window, staring at the moon, wondering if life would ever feel real again. Would she ever walk freely in the forest again? Would she ever hear someone call her name with love and not control? Jabari, proud of his victory, believed he had won, but he didn't realize that while he had trapped her body, he hadn't broken her spirit completely. Deep within Nyoma, a fire still burned, small and quiet, but alive, and that fire one day would rise. Jabari's cruelty didn't end with forcing Nyoma into marriage. In fact, it was only the beginning. He didn't want a partner, he wanted complete control. Day by day, he turned her life into a quiet, painful prison. On the outside, people saw her dressed in fine clothes and living in a large house, but inside, Nyoma was nothing more than a shadow of herself. He stripped her of her dignity bit by bit. He made her serve guests like a common maid. Whenever visitors came to the compound, he would order her around in front of them, making her pour drinks, clean the floor, and fetch things while he sat comfortably, laughing with his friends. "That's all she's good for," he would say loudly. The cursed bride with no value. Nyoma swallowed the pain in silence. She had no choice. The woman who once walked with grace and pride now lowered her eyes and obeyed, just to avoid further humiliation. Jabari didn't allow her to speak in public either. If she dared to voice her opinion, he would snap his fingers and say, "Quiet. No one wants to hear from a woman who brings bad luck." But the worst pain came not from the words spoken in front of others. It came from the private torments he unleashed when no one was watching. Jabari was a master of silent torture. He didn't raise his hand to hit her, but his actions cut deeper than any blade. Some nights, he would walk into her small room with a wicked smile and hold up her few remaining herb scrolls, the ones she had secretly saved. Then, in front of her eyes, he would tear them one by one, letting the pieces fall like ashes to the ground. He laughed as she cried, enjoying the pain in her eyes. Sometimes he would light a match and pretend he was going to burn her last set of dried herbs, only to blow it out at the last second. "You should be grateful I'm letting you keep anything at all," he'd sneer. Nyoma's books were destroyed, her dreams crushed, her soul dimmed. The compound became colder, heavier, like it was swallowing her spirit little by little. Even the servants, afraid of Jabari, dared not speak kindly to her. She lived in silence, surrounded by walls and pain. At night, when no one could see, she would cry into her pillow, her tears soaking the only place that still held her sorrow. There were days she didn't eat, There were nights she didn't sleep. Her body grew weaker, and her smile completely disappeared. It was as if the girl who once lit up the village had been erased. But what Jabari didn't know was that somewhere deep inside her, a small spark still remained. A tiny flicker of the old Nyoma, the strong, brave, kind-hearted healer who once dreamed of helping others, still lived within her. It was faint, almost buried under layers of pain, but it had not died. That little spark, though quiet, held something powerful, and though Jabari thought he had broken her completely, he had no idea that the fire within her was waiting, just waiting, for the right moment to rise again. That night, the wind whispered differently. The moonlight fell gently on the cold stone walls of the compound, casting long shadows, as if the night itself was hiding a secret. Nyoma sat by her small window, her eyes heavy with sorrow, but her heart beating with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It all started a few days earlier, when she had secretly met Elder Tebow, a wise old healer who once lived near the river's edge. He had known Nyoma since she was a little girl, full of dreams and laughter. When he saw her in the village one afternoon, her face pale, her steps slow, and her smile forced, he knew something was deeply wrong. Later that evening, Elder Tebow found a quiet moment to speak with her. He gently held her hand and looked into her tired eyes. "Your spirit is not broken, child," he whispered softly. "They may have locked your body, but your heart still fights. I can see it. Let me help you escape." Nyoma's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't heard such kindness in so long. Her lips trembled, but she nodded slowly. "I'm tired, Elder. I cannot live like this anymore." From that night on, the two began to plan in silence. Every word they exchanged was whispered under the cover of darkness. Elder Tebow began slipping small notes to her through the village children he trusted. He studied the routine of the guards, the schedule of Jabari's travels, and the pattern of doors and gates in the compound. Every detail was important. One mistake could cost her everything. Days passed, and then came the moment they had waited for. Jabari was leaving for a 3-day trade trip to another village. He boasted loudly about it, unaware that his pride had just created the perfect window of freedom. Elder Tebow sent a final message. "Tonight, when the moon is highest, back gate. Wear only what you need. Leave the rest behind." Nyoma's heart raced all day. She packed nothing but a small pouch of herbs, a torn photo of her mother, and a cloth wrapped around her only healing stone, a gift from her late grandmother. When the compound finally fell silent and the guards grew lazy with sleep, she crept toward the back gate. Each step felt like thunder in her ears. Her breath was shaky, her hands trembling. She pushed the wooden gate slowly. It creaked. She paused, heart pounding, listening for any sound, but nothing stirred. Then she slipped out, barefoot, silent, like a ghost fading into the night. Elder Tebow was waiting by the edge of the forest, holding a lantern. When he saw her, he quickly wrapped her in a shawl and led her into the trees. They didn't speak. There was no need. Every leaf crunch underfoot felt like freedom. Every gust of wind felt like a blessing. Nyoma didn't look back, not even once. By morning, they were far away, hidden in the hills where no one could find her. Back in Kandula, Jabari returned to his empty compound. The servants were silent. His footsteps echoed through the halls as he opened every door, shouting her name. "Nyoma! Where is she?" No one answered. When he finally realized she was gone, his face turned red with rage. His voice roared across the village, but it was too late. His captive had flown. His control had shattered, and for the first time Jabari felt what Nyoma had lived through for months: helplessness. In the quiet hills of the Omale kingdom, far from the pain and shadows of Kandula, Nyoma began to breathe again. The air felt fresher here, and the land was untouched by the cruelty she had known. Each sunrise brought a new feeling of peace, a slow healing that touched not only her body but also her spirit. She was finally free, but little did she know, her story was only just beginning. One morning, while gathering herbs in the forest near the royal estate, Nyoma came face to face with destiny. A noble woman on horseback had fallen and injured her arm, and her guards panicked, unsure of what to do. Without hesitation, Nyoma rushed forward. With calm hands and sharp knowledge, she picked nearby leaves, crushed them, and wrapped the wound with precise care. The woman watched her with surprise and respect. That noble woman was Queen Mavala of Omale, a strong and wise ruler known across kingdoms for her fairness and strength. She was not only grateful, but deeply impressed. "What is your name, girl?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Nyoma," she replied, her voice steady but humble. From that moment, the queen took a special interest in her. She invited Nyoma to the royal compound and introduced her to the palace healers. They tested her knowledge, and she amazed them all. Despite having no formal training, her understanding of herbs, roots, and natural remedies was far beyond what they expected. The queen watched quietly and smiled. "This girl is no ordinary soul," she whispered to her head healer. Nyoma began training under the royal healers. For the first time in her life, she was treated with respect and value. Her hands, once punished for touching herbs, now healed royals. Her voice, once silenced in Jabari's house, now gave instructions in the palace halls. She learned rare techniques, discovered ancient healing secrets, and created new herbal blends that cured even the most stubborn illnesses. Her confidence grew. The sadness in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by strength and purpose. Her beauty was no longer just in her face, but in the powerful energy she carried. Soon, Queen Mavala made an official announcement. "From today, Nyoma shall be the royal healer of Omal." The palace clapped. The people cheered. But the loudest noise came from whispers across villages. Word spread like wildfire. "The cursed girl from Kandula is now the healer to the queen." Some doubted it. Others ran to see for themselves. But when they met her, they saw no curse, only greatness. People traveled from far and wide to seek her healing. She treated children, warriors, elders, even nobles from other kingdoms. Her name became a symbol of hope. The same girl who was called cursed, who was mocked and silenced, now held power and honor in her hands. But Nyoma didn't let pride consume her. She remained humble and kind, always helping those in need. Every evening, she stood by the garden, whispering gratitude to the wind, remembering where she came from. And deep in her heart, she knew this was not just healing for others. This was healing for her soul. Back in the village of Kandula, a strange shift began to unfold. Jabari, once the untouchable son of a wealthy merchant, started to feel the grip of misfortune tighten around his life. It started slowly, just a few minor setbacks. His workers began quitting without warning. His best crops withered, even though the rains had come. He dismissed it at first, blaming lazy workers and bad seeds. But then, things got worse. His trade routes, once safe and profitable, became dangerous grounds. Bandits started attacking his caravans, stealing goods, and burning wagons. Word began to spread among traders. Doing business with Jabari brings bad luck. One by one, his investors pulled their money out, afraid of being dragged down with him. His once bustling warehouses stood nearly empty, and his riches began to slip through his fingers like sand. The people of Kandula, who had once feared him, now whispered behind his back. "Maybe it's karma," they said. "He broke an innocent girl's life. Now his own life is falling apart." Others believed the spirits of the ancestors were angry, punishing Jabari for his cruelty and arrogance. But the most powerful blow came not from curses or spirits, but from inside Jabari himself. He began to lose sleep. Night after night, he tossed and turned, haunted by Nyoma's face. Not the face of the girl he tried to control, but the face of the girl who had escaped, who had risen above him. Her silence, her strength, her dignity, it echoed in his mind louder than any insult. He realized something painful. He had never truly won. All his power, his money, his threats, none of it could break her spirit. She had left him behind, and the world had followed her. The village, that once bent to his will, now avoided him. Even the elders he had once bribed turned away. His name, once respected, became a joke at market stalls. "Don't end up like Jabari," people would say with a smirk. He tried to fix things, tried to rebuild his reputation, but it was too late. The foundation had cracked, and everything was falling apart. His pride, his power, his control, it was all slipping. And in the quiet of his empty home, Jabari finally faced the truth. It wasn't just his business that had failed. He had failed as a man. He had tried to destroy someone who only wanted to be free, who only wanted to live her life with love and purpose. And now, the world had taken everything from him, not because of luck, but because of the pain he had caused. As he sat alone, staring at the walls of his grand compound that now felt like a prison, he whispered to himself, "I didn't lose her. I lost myself." Nyoma's life had changed beyond anything she had ever imagined. In the royal hills of Omal, she had risen from pain to purpose. Her healing hands had not only cured wounds, but also touched the hearts of many, including Queen Mavala herself. One day, after a successful royal healing ceremony, Queen Mavela called Nyoma before the council and offered her something she never expected, a noble title. "You are no longer just a healer," the queen said with warmth. "You are a daughter of this kingdom, a woman of strength, wisdom, and honor." With grace and humility, Nyoma accepted the title, but fate still had one more gift to give her. During a peace treaty celebration between Omale and a neighboring kingdom, Nyoma met Zumo, a tall, noble warrior with fierce loyalty in his eyes and a gentle heart behind his armor. Unlike Jabari, Zumo didn't speak with arrogance or pride. He spoke with kindness, asking about her herbs, her dreams, her journey. He listened, he cared, and slowly, Nyoma felt something she thought had died: hope. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper. Zumo never tried to own her. He admired her strength, respected her past, and stood beside her with pride, not dominance. One evening under the golden sky, Zumo knelt before her, not in command, but in love. "I do not want a queen in title," he said softly. "I want a queen in heart. Will you be mine?" Tears welled in Nyoma's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. She nodded, her heart finally at peace. It was not a union of power, it was a union of souls. The royal wedding was beautiful, filled with blessings, songs, and celebration. The girl who had once cried alone in the shadows was now honored by kings and queens. But Nyoma's story was not just about finding love, it was also about reclaiming her dignity. Months after her wedding, Queen Mavela organized a goodwill visit to Kandula. Nyoma was invited as a guest of honor, wearing royal robes embroidered with gold, her head held high. The same village that once whispered curses behind her back now stood in silence as her royal chariot entered. Children ran beside her, women knelt in admiration, and even the elders bowed in respect. The air was thick with awe. No one could believe this was the same Nyoma they once ignored, humiliated, and cast aside. Nyoma smiled, not out of pride, but because she had survived. She had risen from ashes, not to seek revenge, but to inspire. Her presence alone was a message. No one can dim a soul that was meant to shine. And somewhere in a corner, Jabari stood hidden in the crowd, watching everything unfold. His eyes burned with regret. He had tried to break her, but she had become more powerful than he could ever imagine. Nyoma did not even look his way. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than 1,000 words. Jabari stood silently at the edge of the village square, his heart heavy and his spirit broken. The same man who once walked with pride, head high and chest puffed with arrogance, now watched from a distance, dressed in worn-out clothes, with dust on his feet and shame in his eyes. The drums of celebration echoed through Kandula. The villagers danced and sang, their voices rising in joy and excitement, not for Jabari, but for the woman he once tried to destroy. Nyoma had returned, not as the broken girl he once mocked, but as a noble woman, a healer of the royal court, and a symbol of strength and grace. She stepped into the square with elegance, her royal robe flowing behind her, her head held high, her presence commanding the attention of all. Children ran to her with flowers, elders bowed in respect. Even the sky seemed to shine brighter with her presence. Jabari's heart pounded. He could no longer hide in the crowd. His guilt pushed him forward. Slowly, he walked toward her, each step feeling heavier than the last. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned toward the man who had once ruled the village with fear and pride. When he finally reached her, he could barely speak. His lips trembled, and his eyes were filled with tears he could no longer hold back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. I didn't know what I was doing. I was blinded by my pride. Nyoma stood calmly, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't cry. She looked him straight in the eyes, those same eyes that once held cruelty, but now overflowed with regret. "I told you I didn't love you," she said softly but firmly, "and instead of letting me live in peace, you turned my life into a living hell. You broke my spirit, destroyed my dreams, and laughed at my pain. But look at me now, Jabari. I found strength without you. I found peace, love, and a purpose. You were never the end of my story. You were just a chapter, a painful one, but not the final one." The crowd gasped. Some nodded in agreement. Others turned away from Jabari in disgust. The same villagers who once believed his lies, who once whispered behind Nyoma's back, now clapped and chanted her name in admiration. Jabari dropped to his knees, right there in the middle of the village square, tears pouring down his face. He tried to hold her hand, but she stepped back, not out of hate, but to show him that she had risen far above his reach. There was nothing left to say. Days passed, and Jabari became a shadow of his former self. No one feared him anymore. No one respected him. His wealth was gone, his power vanished, and his name carried only shame. He sat at the market gate, begging for food, while children walked past him, singing songs of Nyoma's courage. He had lost everything, not just riches, but dignity, honor, and the chance to ever make it right. And Nyoma? She never looked back again. Her story had moved beyond his reach, leaving him behind in the very dust he once kicked in pride. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. How many Nyomas are out there, silently suffering, yet holding on to hope? This tale is not just about pain, it's about strength, resilience, and rising from the ashes no matter how deep the wounds. Nyoma's journey reminds us that no one can dim the light of a soul that refuses to be broken, and those who try to destroy others with cruelty will one day face the weight of their own actions. If you believe in justice, if you believe in the power of rising again, then don't let this story fade away. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us continue to bring you these heart-touching tales that inspire and heal. Thank you for watching from the bottom of our hearts.